You think you know what sacrifice looks like? Wait until you hear what this man gave up for a family that never even knew his name. 3 hours before the funeral of Nathaniel Price, his daughter-in-law found an envelope taped to the underside of his nightstand drawer. She almost threw it away. But when the lawyer read what was inside at the graveside, every person in that cemetery stopped moving. The women who hadn't shed a tear started sobbing. The man who had called Nathaniel worthless went pale. And the secret that Nathaniel had carried for 41 years finally came into the light. Hello and welcome. If this is your first time here, please subscribe. If you've been with us before, thank you for coming back. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Miami, Cape Town, maybe Port of Spain or Birmingham? We want to hear from you. Now pay attention to what happens in this story. Because this is one of those stories that changes how you look at the people around you. The quiet ones. The ones who never say much. The ones who sit in the back and keep their heads down. Because sometimes those people are carrying secrets that would bring a room to its knees. Let me tell you about Nathaniel Price. Nathaniel was 78 years old when he died. He was a small man, 5'5", 140 pounds, the kind of man you could walk past on the street and never notice. His frame was narrow, his shoulders slightly rounded from decades of bending over workbenches and sinks and engines. His hands were the most remarkable thing about him. Long, thin fingers, scarred across the knuckles and the palms, with calluses so thick and permanent they looked like they had been carved from wood. His skin was light brown, weathered, with deep lines around his mouth and eyes that made his face look like a map of everywhere he had been and everything he had endured. His hair, what was left of it, was white and wispy, combed straight back from his forehead with a dab of pomade every morning, even on the days when he wasn't going anywhere. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, set deep in his face, and they had a quality that people noticed without knowing what to call it. Stillness. That was the word. Nathaniel's eyes were still, the way deep water is still, calm on the surface, but holding more than you could see. Nathaniel wore the same kind of clothes every day for as long as anyone could remember. Gray work pants, a white undershirt, a blue button-down shirt over it, always blue, always the same shade, as if he had bought a dozen of them 30 years ago and was still working through the stack. Brown shoes, plain, laced tight. He didn't own a suit. When someone once asked him why, he said, "A suit is for people who need to look important. I'd rather be useful." Nathaniel lived in a small house on Chestnut Street in a town called Millbrook, about 45 minutes south of Birmingham, Alabama. The house was old, built in 1952, brick, one story, with a covered porch and a yard that Nathaniel kept mowed even when he was too tired to stand. The inside was plain. A living room with a brown sofa and a television that still had a tube in the back. A kitchen with a gas stove, a table for two, and a window that looked out onto the backyard where a single pecan tree stood, big, old, its branches spreading so wide they shaded half the yard. A bedroom with a full-size bed, a nightstand with a lamp and a Bible, and a closet with 7 blue shirts hanging in a row. A bathroom with a cracked tile floor and a mirror that had gone cloudy around the edges. The house smelled like coffee and wood shavings and something faintly sweet, pecan shells. Nathaniel collected the pecans from the tree every fall. He cracked them at the kitchen table one by one with a small metal nutcracker, and he saved the meat in mason jars that lined the shelf above the stove. He gave the jars away, to neighbors, to the woman at the post office, to the children who walked past his house on the way to school. He kept almost none for himself. Nathaniel had worked his entire life. He started at 13 years old, barely tall enough to see over a workbench, sweeping floors at a mechanic's shop on the south side of Birmingham. The shop belonged to a man named Mr. Leonard Gibbs, a heavy-set man with oil-stained fingers and a voice like gravel who smoked unfiltered cigarettes and called everybody son. Mr. Gibbs saw something in Nathaniel that nobody else had seen. Patience. The boy was patient. He could sit and watch Mr. Gibbs rebuild a carburetor for 2 hours without fidgeting, without getting bored, without looking away. He absorbed everything. He remembered everything. And when Mr. Gibbs finally handed him a wrench and said, "Show me what you learned," Nathaniel took that carburetor apart and put it back together in 45 minutes. Perfect. Every bolt, every gasket, every spring in the right place. By 16, he was changing oil and replacing brake pads. By 18, he could diagnose a problem by the sound of an engine. A tick here, a knock there, a wheeze that meant the timing belt was going. By 20, he could rebuild an engine from a pile of parts with his eyes half closed, working by feel, the way a blind man reads Braille. Mr. Gibbs said, "Nate, you've got the best hands I've ever seen. You could build anything." Nathaniel said, "I just like fixing things, Mr. Gibbs." And that was the truth of him, the whole truth, in 5 words. I just like fixing things. He never went to college, never finished high school, dropped out at 16 because his mother was sick and someone had to work. His mother, Pearl, had rheumatoid arthritis so bad she couldn't button her own blouse some mornings. She worked as a housekeeper for a white family on the north side of Birmingham, the Marshalls, who had 5 children and a house with 14 rooms, and a woman named Pearl who came every day and cleaned and cooked and ironed and scrubbed and went home at night to a 3-room apartment with peeling wallpaper and a toilet that ran all night. Pearl never complained. She said, "The Lord gives you the life you've got, and you make it the life you want." Nathaniel heard those words every day of his childhood. They sewed themselves into his bones. He got his GED at 24, sitting in a folding chair at the Martin Luther King Community Center, filling in bubbles on a Scantron sheet with a number 2 pencil. His hands shook the whole time, not from cold, from fear. The fear of failing at something that other people did at 18 without breaking a sweat. The fear of being told he wasn't smart enough. The fear that the mechanics and the sweeping and the fixing were all he was good for. He didn't fail. He passed with the highest score in his class. A woman from the center called him to tell him. He thanked her. He put the certificate in the nightstand drawer, the same drawer where, decades later, he would put the letter for James. And he went back to work the next morning as if nothing had happened. Because that was Nathaniel. He didn't celebrate himself. He just kept moving forward, one bolt, one pipe, one repair at a time. Over the next 55 years, Nathaniel held more jobs than most people hold in 3 lifetimes. Mechanic, plumber, handyman, janitor at the elementary school, where the children called him Mr. Nate and left drawings on his mop cart. Groundskeeper at the cemetery on Old Church Road, where he trimmed the grass around headstones with the same care he brought to everything, because the dead deserved neat lawns too. Night watchman at the lumber mill, where he walked the perimeter at 2 in the morning with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee, listening to the crickets and the distant trains. Short order cook at the diner on Route 9 for 3 years. He learned to make eggs 6 ways and grits that the owner said were better than his grandmother's, which was the highest compliment the man knew how to give. He worked at the school district for 12 years, maintaining buildings, fixing boilers that were older than he was, replacing windows that leaked, unclogging drains that backed up every time it rained. He was the man people called when something was broken. Not because he was cheap, though he never charged much, and sometimes he charged nothing at all. Because he fixed things right. He fixed things with patience and care and the quiet pride of a man who believes that even a leaky faucet deserves to be done properly. He would not leave a job until it was right. He would not cut corners. He would not use a shorthand or a workaround when the right fix was available. If it's worth fixing, he told James once, it's worth fixing right. A quick fix is just a slow failure waiting to happen. Nathaniel had a wife. Her name was Dorothy. And I need to tell you about Dorothy because she was half of everything. Dorothy Louise Price was a force of nature in a floral dress. She was a large woman, 5'8", 200 pounds, with a wide face and a wider smile, and arms that could wrap around 2 people at once and make both of them feel like they were the only person in the world. Her skin was dark and smooth, and she wore her hair in a crown of braids that she pinned up every morning with bobby pins and took down every night at bedtime in a ritual that took 20 minutes and that Nathaniel watched every single night for 40 years because he thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Dorothy sang in the choir at Greater Hope Baptist Church. Alto, the backbone of the harmony, the voice that held everything together while the sopranos flew high and the tenors wobbled. When Dorothy sang, you felt it in your chest. Not because she was loud, though she was, but because she sang with everything she had. Every note was a full commitment. Every hymn was a prayer she meant. She cooked meals that were legendary in Millbrook. Sunday dinner at the Price House was an open invitation. You didn't need the call, you just showed up, and there would be food. Fried chicken with a crust so crispy it crackled when you bit it. Collard greens, slow-cooked with smoked turkey neck. Mac and cheese baked with a top layer so golden and crusty it looked like a sunset. Cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, sweet and dense. And pecan pie, Dorothy's pecan pie, made with Nathaniel's pecans from the tree in the backyard, was famous in Millbrook and beyond. People ordered them for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for birthdays, for funerals, for no reason at all except they wanted to eat something that tasted the way love would taste if love had a flavor. Dorothy loved Nathaniel with a fierceness that was hard to describe and impossible to miss. She called him my quiet man. She said it with such tenderness, drawing out the word quiet like it was a term of endearment, which for Dorothy it was, that you could hear 40 years of marriage in 2 words. She knew Nathaniel better than he knew himself. She knew that he was smarter than he let on. She knew that his quietness wasn't shyness, it was choice. He chose to listen. He chose to observe. He chose to fix rather than talk. And Dorothy loved him for all of it. She knew the secret. She was the only person alive who knew it. And when she died 11 years ago, diabetes, then kidney failure, then a series of strokes that took her piece by piece over 2 terrible years, the secret should have died with her. But it didn't. Because Nathaniel wrote it down. 12 pages, front and back, in pencil, on lined paper. The way he did everything, carefully, quietly, with his scarred hands and his still eyes and his heart that had been carrying a weight too heavy for one man for 41 years. Now, Nathaniel and Dorothy had no biological children. They tried for years. The doctors said it was unlikely, and unlikely turned into never. Dorothy grieved it. She grieved it in the bathroom with the door closed and the water running, where she thought Nathaniel couldn't hear her crying. But he could hear. He always heard. And it hurt him in a place he didn't have a name for, a hollow place, deep in his chest, that nothing he could fix with tools would fill. But Nathaniel did have a son, not by blood, by choice, by love. His name was James. And the thing about trust is this. Once you understand why someone kept a secret, the secret itself changes shape. It stops being a lie and starts being a sacrifice. Pay attention to that, because it matters. James was Nathaniel's nephew, the son of Nathaniel's older brother, Robert. Robert was everything Nathaniel was not. Tall, handsome, loud, charming. Robert could walk into a room and own it within 30 seconds. He had a smile that made women forget their good sense and a voice that could sell you a broken clock. Robert worked in real estate, not the honest kind, the kind where you talk fast and hope nobody reads the fine print. He made good money. He spent it faster. He married a woman named Gloria, beautiful, sharp, ambitious, and they had James. But Robert was also cruel. Not in the obvious way. He didn't hit, he didn't shout. He was cruel in the quiet way, the way that leaves no bruises but does just as much damage. He ignored. He dismissed. He made people feel small with a look, a sigh, a turned back. He made Gloria feel like she was never quite enough. And he made James, little James, born premature at 4 pounds 6 ounces, small and fragile as a bird, feel like he was a disappointment from the day he arrived. Robert didn't want a small, quiet son. He wanted a son who was like him, big, loud, impressive. James was none of those things. James was small and shy and afraid of loud noises. He liked to draw. He liked to sit in the corner and watch people. He liked to build things with blocks and take them apart and build them again. Robert looked at this child and saw weakness, and his response to weakness was to pretend it didn't exist. But what happened next changed everything. When James was 3 years old, Robert left. Just left. He packed a bag on a Tuesday morning, kissed Gloria on the cheek, not a real kiss, a performance kiss, the kind you give when you're already gone inside, and drove away in his silver BMW. He moved to Houston with a woman named Denise, who he'd been seeing for a year. He didn't say goodbye to James. He didn't leave a note. He just vanished, the way a shadow vanishes when the light changes. Gloria collapsed, not physically, emotionally. She stopped eating. She stopped cleaning. She stopped getting dressed. She stopped being a mother in every way except the biological one. James wandered around the apartment in dirty clothes, hungry, crying, while Gloria lay on the couch staring at the ceiling. Nathaniel found out on a Thursday. Dorothy told him. She'd gotten a call from a neighbor of Gloria's who said she was worried about the baby. Nathaniel drove to Birmingham that night. He knocked on Gloria's door. She opened it. The apartment smelled like old food and unwashed laundry. James was sitting on the kitchen floor in a diaper that needed changing, eating dry cereal from a box, his face streaked with tears and snot. Nathaniel picked up the boy. He held him against his chest. James was 3 years old, and he weighed barely 25 pounds, lighter than a bag of dog food. The boy stopped crying the moment Nathaniel picked him up. He put his small hand on Nathaniel's face and looked at him with big, dark eyes, and Nathaniel felt something crack open inside him. Not break, crack open, the way a seed cracks open when it's ready to grow. "I'll take care of him," Nathaniel said to Gloria, "until you're back on your feet." Gloria didn't fight it. She was too empty to fight anything. She nodded and turned back to the couch. Nathaniel took James home to Millbrook. Dorothy was waiting on the porch. She saw the boy in Nathaniel's arms, small, dirty, still holding a fistful of dry cereal, and her face did something that Nathaniel had never seen before. It opened, like a door that had been locked for years, suddenly swinging wide. "Give him to me," Dorothy said, and she took that boy and held him, and carried him inside and bathed him and fed him, and put him in the bed they had bought years ago hoping they would need it, and James slept for 14 hours straight. But Nathaniel had no idea what was coming next. Until you're back on your feet became a week. A week became a month. A month became a year. Gloria didn't get better. She got worse. She started drinking, then pills, then disappeared. Moved to Mobile, then Memphis, then somewhere nobody could track. She didn't call. She didn't write. She didn't come back for James. Not once. Not ever. Robert sent a check for 3 months. Then the check stopped. Nathaniel called him. Robert said, "I'm starting over, Nate. I can't carry old baggage." Old baggage. His own 3-year-old son. Nathaniel hung up the phone. He sat at the kitchen table. Dorothy was giving James a bath. He could hear the splashing, the giggling, the sound of Dorothy singing "This Little Light of Mine" in her big alto voice. Nathaniel put his head in his hands, his rough, scarred hands, and he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He and Dorothy would raise James as their own, not temporarily, not as a favor, as their son. And now, here is the secret that Nathaniel carried for 41 years. Dorothy wanted to tell James the truth, that Robert was his father, that Gloria was his mother, that Nathaniel and Dorothy were his aunt and uncle. She wanted to tell him because she believed in honesty. But Nathaniel said no. He said, "That boy has been abandoned by every person who was supposed to love him. His father called him baggage. His mother couldn't look at him. If we tell him that, it will break something inside him that we can't fix. We tell him he's ours. We raise him as ours, and we love him so hard that the truth doesn't matter." Dorothy disagreed. They argued about it, one of the only real arguments of their marriage. It lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, Dorothy looked at James, who was sitting on the living room floor, drawing a picture of the pecan tree with a brown crayon, and she said, "All right, he's ours." They changed the paperwork. Nathaniel's brother Robert, who wanted nothing to do with his son, signed over custody without hesitation. The process was quick, quiet, and legal. James Price became, in every way that mattered, Nathaniel and Dorothy's son. James grew up in the house on Chestnut Street. He climbed the pecan tree, all the way to the top, where the branches got thin and swayed in the wind, and Nathaniel would stand below with his hands on his hips and his heart in his throat, saying, "That's high enough, James. Come on down." James never came down when told. He always climbed one branch higher, and Nathaniel would shake his head and smile, because stubbornness was a gift when it was aimed in the right direction. James ate Dorothy's pie. He sat at the kitchen table every afternoon doing homework, while Nathaniel cracked pecans, the steady pop-crack-pop of the nutcracker like a metronome, and listened to jazz on the radio. James asked questions about everything. Why does the pecan tree lose its leaves? How does the water know which way to go in the pipe? Why is the sky blue but the sunset is orange? Nathaniel answered every question. When he didn't know the answer, he said, "I don't know, let's find out." And they would go to the library, the Millbrook Public Library, a small brick building with a creaky door and a librarian named Mrs. Hodges who wore glasses on a chain, and they would look it up together. James went to Greater Hope Baptist on Sundays and sat between Nathaniel and Dorothy in the third pew, right side, near the window. He was small, like Nathaniel, and quiet, like Nathaniel, and he had Nathaniel's hands, which is to say he had Robert's hands, but the way James used them was nothing like Robert. Robert used his hands to take. James used his hands to build, to fix, to create. He drew pictures, detailed pencil drawings of the house, the pecan tree, the church, Nathaniel working in the garage. He made things out of wood scraps, a birdhouse that was crooked but functional, a picture frame for Dorothy's birthday, a small box with a hinged lid where Nathaniel kept his nutcracker. He took apart the toaster one Saturday morning and put it back together, and it worked better than before. Dorothy nearly had a heart attack. Nathaniel just said, "Good job, now do the blender." Nathaniel taught James everything he knew. How to change a tire. Loosen the bolts before you jack it up or the tire will spin. How to patch a roof. Start at the bottom, work up, and overlap every row. How to fix a leaky pipe. Listen first. The water tells you where the problem is. How to shake a man's hand. Firm, one pump. Look him in the eye. If he doesn't look back, watch your wallet. How to treat people. Every person you meet is carrying something you can't see. Be gentle. How to be useful. The world doesn't need more important people, Nathaniel told him, sitting on the porch one evening, cracking pecans while the sun went down. It needs more useful ones. James was a good student, not the smartest kid in class. That was a girl named Tamika who could solve math problems in her head faster than the teacher could write them on the board. But James was consistent. He showed up every day. He did his homework. He asked questions. He worked hard. And when he struggled, algebra mostly, which felt to James like someone had taken English and put it through a blender, he came home and sat at the kitchen table, and Nathaniel sat beside him, and they worked through the problems together, one equation at a time, even though Nathaniel himself had never taken algebra and had to learn it alongside his son. That is what love looks like, in case you were wondering. It looks like a man with a 7th grade education sitting at a kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, teaching himself algebra so his son doesn't have to struggle alone. James went to college, the first person in Nathaniel's family to go. Auburn University, mechanical engineering, full scholarship. The scholarship came because James's high school physics teacher, a man named Mr. Wallace, saw something in James and wrote a recommendation letter so powerful that the admissions committee read it twice. Nathaniel drove James to Auburn in the old pickup truck. 4 hours on Highway 280, neither of them saying much, because they were the kind of men who said important things with silence. The truck's radio was broken, and neither of them had fixed it, because the silence between them was comfortable, the kind of silence that's full, not empty. At the campus, Nathaniel helped James carry his boxes to the dorm room, a small room on the 3rd floor with a twin bed and a desk and a window that looked out onto a quad where students were throwing a frisbee and laughing. Nathaniel set the last box on the desk and stood there for a moment, looking at the room, his hands in his pockets. "You call me if you need anything," Nathaniel said. "If anything breaks, I'll come fix it." James laughed. "Dad, they have maintenance people." "I'll come fix it better." They stood in the doorway. Nathaniel put his hand on James's shoulder, That big, scarred, calloused hand. The hand that had fixed 10,000 broken things. And he squeezed. Just once. The way a man says, "I love you," when the words are too big for his mouth. Then Nathaniel walked down the hall, down the stairs, out of the building, across the parking lot. Dorothy was waiting in the truck. She had ridden along but stayed in the cab because her knees were bad and 3 flights of stairs were more than she could manage. She saw Nathaniel's face through the windshield and she knew. "He's going to be fine," Dorothy said. "I know he is." "Then why are you crying?" Nathaniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Because he's fine. That's why." James graduated with honors, magna cum laude, which Nathaniel had to look up because he didn't know what it meant. And when he found out, he sat at the kitchen table and cried for the second time in James's life. The first time was the day he picked James up from the apartment in Birmingham. The second time was the day James proved that a boy eating cereal off a kitchen floor could become a man with honors from Auburn University. James got a job at an engineering firm in Atlanta. A good firm, the kind that builds bridges and highways and water treatment plants, the kind that makes things that last. He married a woman named Camille, smart, kind, with a laugh that reminded Nathaniel of Dorothy, which was the highest compliment Nathaniel could give. They had 2 children, a girl named Dorothy, after Nathaniel's wife, and a boy named Nate, after Nathaniel himself. When James called to tell him the boy's name, Nathaniel couldn't speak. He just held the phone and breathed and let the tears come. And through all of it, through the college and the job and the wedding and the grandchildren and the Sunday phone calls and the holiday visits, James never knew. He never knew that Nathaniel was his uncle, not his father. He never knew that Robert was his biological father. He never knew about Gloria, about the apartment, about the cereal on the floor. He believed he was Nathaniel and Dorothy's biological son. He believed it completely. And Nathaniel carried the truth like a stone in his pocket. Always there, always heavy, always pressing against his leg with every step. 41 years. 14,965 days. Not one day passed without Nathaniel thinking about it. Not one day passed without him wondering if he had done the right thing. Dorothy knew. She was the only one who knew. And she took the secret to her grave when she died 11 years ago. On her deathbed, she held Nathaniel's hand and said, "Tell him, Nate. After I'm gone. Tell him the truth." Nathaniel said, "I will." But he didn't. Not then. Because how do you tell a man that everything he believes about himself is wrong? How do you say, "Your parents didn't want you, but I did"? How do you take apart the foundation of a person's life and expect the building to still stand? He didn't tell James. He wrote it down instead. 12 pages. And he taped it to the underside of the nightstand drawer, behind the Bible, where it waited for 11 years. Now here is where everything changes. Nathaniel died on a Wednesday morning in November. He died the way he lived, quietly, without fuss. He had been sick for 8 months. Lung cancer, diagnosed late, spread everywhere. He refused aggressive treatment. He said, "I've fixed enough broken things for one lifetime. Some things you let go." He stayed in the house on Chestnut Street. A hospice nurse named Rosalie came every day. James drove from Atlanta every weekend. Camille brought the grandchildren, little Dorothy, who was 7, and Nate, who was 4. In the last weeks, James sat beside his father's bed every night. Nathaniel was thin, thinner than James had ever seen him, barely 100 pounds, his hands resting on the blanket like fallen leaves. James held his hand and talked to him, about work, about the kids, about the pecan tree that needed pruning. Nathaniel mostly listened. His eyes were still the way deep water is still. 2 days before he died, Nathaniel said something that James didn't understand at the time. "James," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need you to check the nightstand after I'm gone. The bottom drawer, underneath the Bible." "What's there?" Nathaniel closed his eyes. "The truth." James didn't push it. He thought his father was confused, the medication, the exhaustion, the weight of dying. He squeezed Nathaniel's hand and said, "I'll check, Dad." Nathaniel died 2 mornings later. The hospice nurse was there. The sun was coming through the window. The pecan tree cast a shadow across the bed. Nathaniel's last breath was so quiet that Rosalie wasn't sure he had stopped breathing until she pressed her fingers to his wrist and felt nothing. James got the call at 7 in the morning. He drove to Millbrook in 2 hours, a drive that should have taken 3, and he walked into the house on Chestnut Street and stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at the empty bed and felt the world tilt sideways. The funeral was held at Greater Hope Baptist Church on a Saturday afternoon in November. Reverend Tate presided, a young man, only 38, but he had been at Greater Hope for 6 years, and he had known Nathaniel well enough to know that the eulogy should be short, because Nathaniel would have wanted it that way. "Keep it simple, Reverend," Nathaniel had told him during one of his visits in those final weeks. "People don't need to hear speeches about me. They need to get home for supper." The church was full, not packed to the rafters. Nathaniel was not that kind of man, but full. Every pew had someone in it. People from Millbrook came because Nathaniel had been part of the fabric of their lives for decades. He'd fixed something in almost every house in town. The plumber, Mr. Robinson, came. Nathaniel had helped him with a job at the elementary school 10 years ago, and they had worked side by side for 3 days. And Robinson still said Nathaniel was the best pipe man he'd ever seen. The school principal, Dr. Williams, came. She remembered the years when Nathaniel maintained the buildings, how the boilers always worked and the windows never leaked, and the playground equipment was always safe, because Nathaniel checked every bolt, every chain, every weld, every single month. Mrs. Jefferson from the post office came, carrying a mason jar of pecans that Nathaniel had given her last October. She held the jar in her lap during the service like it was a jewel. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store came. Mr. Cole from the hardware store came. He said Nathaniel was his best customer for 30 years and the most honest man he'd ever met. "He'd come in for a washer that cost 6 cents, Mr. Cole told someone in the parking lot, and he'd ask if I was sure I was charging him the right price. The man wanted to make sure he wasn't underpaying for a 6-cent washer. But here's the thing about the funeral that tells you everything. The thing that matters more than the flowers and the hymns and the eulogies. Nobody cried. Not one person. The church was full of people who respected Nathaniel. People who appreciated what he had done for their homes, their schools, their pipes, their boilers. People who were grateful for the jar of pecans at Christmas and the hand-delivered jar of pecan butter Dorothy used to make and that Nathaniel had kept making after she died, following her recipe card with the same precision he brought to everything. They were grateful people. Good people. But nobody cried. Because crying requires connection. Crying requires knowing someone so deeply that their absence tears a hole in you. And Nathaniel had been so quiet, so private, so carefully and deliberately invisible, that most people in that church had never gotten past the surface. They knew what Nathaniel did. They knew he fixed things. They knew he cracked pecans. They knew he sat in the third pew every Sunday. But they didn't know who he was. They didn't know the man underneath the blue shirt. They didn't know the secret. They didn't know the sacrifice. James sat in the front pew with Camille, little Dorothy, and Nate. Camille was holding Nate on her lap. Dorothy sat between her parents, quiet and still, her legs not reaching the floor. James's face was stone. Not because he wasn't devastated, he was. But James was Nathaniel's son in every way that mattered, and Nathaniel's sons didn't cry in public. They held it. They carried it. They let it out later, alone, in the dark, the way quiet men do. Robert was there, Nathaniel's older brother. He had driven from Houston, 11 hours in a used Buick with a broken air conditioner and a rattle in the dashboard that would have taken Nathaniel 3 minutes to diagnose and fix. Robert was 71 now, and the years had been unkind. The charm was gone, worn off like cheap paint. The BMW was gone, repossessed years ago. The real estate business was gone, collapsed in the 2008 crash and never recovered. Denise was gone, left him for a man in Shreveport 12 years ago, taking the furniture, the television, and what was left of Robert's pride. Robert sat in the back pew, wearing a dark suit that didn't fit right anymore, too loose in the shoulders, too tight in the waist, and he looked at the casket with an expression that was hard to read. Was it guilt? The grinding, inescapable guilt of a man who abandoned his own son and left his quiet little brother to clean up the mess? Was it regret? The heavy, useless kind that comes too late to change anything? Or was it something simpler? The uncomfortable awareness that the brother he had dismissed as little Nate the handyman had lived a life so full of purpose and love that Robert's own life looked like an empty room by comparison. Robert didn't cry either. But his jaw was clenched the entire service, the way a man clenches his jaw when he is holding back something that would drown him if he let it out. And then came the moment that changed everything. After the service, the family gathered at the graveside. The casket was lowered into the red Alabama clay. Reverend Tate read from Psalms, the 23rd, because Nathaniel had asked for it, because it was Dorothy's favorite. The November wind moved through the cemetery, shaking the last leaves from the oaks and the maples, sending them spinning down like small brown hands. People started to drift away. The respectful shuffle of a crowd that has paid its respects and is thinking about dinner, about football, about the drive home. Then Camille touched James's arm. "James," she said quietly, "your father said to check the nightstand." James had forgotten. In the blur of grief and arrangements and phone calls and flowers, he had forgotten. He drove back to the house on Chestnut Street. He went to the bedroom. He opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand. Under the Bible with the cracked spine and the ribbon bookmark in Psalms, he found an envelope. A large manila envelope, sealed with tape, with one word written on the front in Nathaniel's careful handwriting. James. James took the envelope to the kitchen table. He sat in Nathaniel's chair, the chair on the left side, nearest the window, the chair where Nathaniel had sat every evening for 50 years, cracking pecans and listening to the radio, and being the quiet, steady center of a life that most people never looked at closely enough to understand. James opened the envelope. His hands were steady, the hands Nathaniel had trained, the hands that could build bridges and solve equations and hold a pencil with the same precision they held a wrench. Inside were 3 things: a letter written in pencil on lined paper, 12 pages front and back, in Nathaniel's careful handwriting. Every letter was deliberate. Every word was chosen. The pencil lines were dark and even, pressed into the paper with the firmness of a man who had something important to say and wanted to make sure every word survived. A photograph, faded, creased from being folded and unfolded many times, showing a young woman holding a baby in a hospital blanket. The woman had dark skin and tired eyes and braids that were coming undone, and she was looking at the baby with an expression that was equal parts love and fear. And a legal document, the custody transfer, dated 41 years ago, typed on official paper, with 2 signatures at the bottom. Robert Price and Gloria Simmons, transferring all parental rights of James Robert Price to Nathaniel and Dorothy Price. James looked at the document first. He read it twice. His eyebrows pulled together, the same furrow Nathaniel got when he was trying to understand something. Then he read the letter. It began, "My dear James, this is the hardest thing I have ever written, and I have written it and thrown it away 17 times over the past 11 years. Dorothy told me to tell you. She told me on her deathbed, and I promised her I would. But I couldn't say it out loud. My voice wouldn't do it. So I'm writing it. Because you deserve the truth, even if the truth hurts. Especially if the truth hurts." Nathaniel wrote everything, every detail. The way a man who has carried a secret for 4 decades writes when he finally sets it down, completely, thoroughly, leaving nothing out. He wrote about Robert, about the charm and the BMW and the silver tongue, about the cruelty underneath, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't leave bruises. He wrote about Gloria, beautiful, broken, too young to be a mother and too alone to be anything else. He wrote about the apartment in Birmingham, the smell, the laundry, the cereal on the floor. He wrote about the drive to Millbrook with James in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like a stranger's apartment, sleeping with his mouth open and his small fist holding a piece of dry Cheerio. He wrote about Dorothy, about the moment she took James from Nathaniel's arms on the front porch and held him against her chest, and the look on her face, the look of a woman who had been waiting for something she had stopped believing would come. He wrote about the bath, the singing, the 14 hours of sleep. He wrote about the morning after, how James woke up and walked into the kitchen and saw Dorothy at the stove making eggs, and he climbed onto a chair and said, "More, please," and Dorothy laughed so hard she burned the toast. He wrote, "Your mother's name was Gloria Simmons. She was not a bad woman. She was a broken woman. And there is a difference that most people are too impatient to understand. She loved you the best way she knew how, and her best was not enough. And that is a tragedy, not a crime. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her for what she couldn't give you, the way I have tried to forgive my brother for what he chose not to." He wrote, "Your father's name is Robert Price. He is my brother. He was not ready to be a father. He was too busy being Robert. I have been angry at him for 41 years, and I have also been grateful to him, because his leaving gave me you. And you, James, are the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Greater than any house I fixed. Greater than any engine I rebuilt. Greater than any boiler I kept running through a cold winter. You." He wrote, "Dorothy and I could not have children of our own. We tried for years. When you came to us, 3 years old, 25 pounds, holding cereal in your fist, you were the answer to a prayer we had stopped praying. You were not a second choice, James. You were not plan B. You were not a favor or an obligation or a duty. You were our first miracle, our only miracle." He wrote, "I know you will be angry. You have every right to be angry. I lied to you for your entire life. I looked you in the eyes at the kitchen table and I let you believe something that wasn't true, but I want you to understand why. I lied because I loved you too much to let the truth break you. A boy who knows his parents abandoned him carries that knowledge like a stone tied to his ankle. I wanted you to carry something lighter. I wanted you to carry the feeling of being wanted, of being chosen, of being enough. Because you were always enough, James. From the first moment, you were always, always enough." The last paragraph read, "I am dying, and I am not afraid. I am not afraid because I have lived a complete life. I fixed 10,000 broken things. I ate Dorothy's pecan pie. I watched you become the man I always knew you would be. I held my grandchildren, James, mine. And I smelled their hair, and I thanked God for every second. I cracked pecans under the tree. I had everything. Everything. And it all started the night I drove to Birmingham and picked up a little boy who had no one. You were not my nephew, James. You were not my brother's mistake. You were not my obligation. You were my son. From the first moment I held you, you were my son. And I was your father. And nothing, not blood, not paper, not biology, not time, will ever change that. I love you. I have always loved you. And I will love you from wherever I go next, because love is the one thing that doesn't need a body to survive." James set the letter on the table. The kitchen was silent, completely silent. The refrigerator had stopped humming. The clock had reached the space between ticks. Even the wind outside had paused, as if the whole world had leaned in to listen and was now holding its breath. James looked at the photograph. The young woman, Gloria, holding a baby. Him. That was him, in that blanket, in those arms. He looked at her face, the tired eyes, the braids coming undone, the expression, love and fear, tangled together like roots underground. He had never seen this woman's face before, and yet she had held him. She had carried him for 9 months and brought him into the world and held him in a hospital and looked at him with that face full of impossible, inadequate, heartbroken love. He looked at the legal document, the signatures, Robert's, confident, slashing, the handwriting of a man who signed things without reading them. Gloria's, small, shaky, the handwriting of a woman who knew she was signing something she could never undo. James put his head on the table, on the oak, on the wood that Nathaniel's hands had shaped, on the surface where they had eaten 10,000 meals and cracked 10,000 pecans and done 10,000 homework problems together. and he wept. He wept for Nathaniel, the small, quiet man in the blue shirt who carried a stone in his pocket for 41 years so that his son could walk unburdened. He wept for Dorothy, the woman with the big voice and the bigger heart who sang him to sleep and called him her baby and took the secret to her grave. He wept for Gloria, wherever she was, alive or dead, the woman who gave birth to him and couldn't hold on. He wept for himself, for the boy on the kitchen floor with cereal in his fist who was rescued by a man who believed that fixing things was the most important work in the world. And he wept for the thing he understood now, the thing the letter made clear, the thing that Nathaniel had spent 41 years trying to show him without words. That family is not blood. Family is not biology. Family is not the people you are born to. Family is the people who choose you, who wake up every morning and choose you again, who sit with you at the kitchen table and crack pecans and listen to jazz and help you with algebra even though they never took algebra themselves. Family is a choice, and Nathaniel chose James. Every single day, for 41 years, without hesitation, without regret, without conditions. That is what love looks like. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up every Saturday with grocery bags and a toolbox and a terrible pie. The kind that carries a secret for 4 decades because the truth would hurt too much. The kind that looks at a broken boy on a kitchen floor and sees, not a problem, but a son. James drove back to the cemetery that evening. It was almost dark. The sun was a thin orange line on the horizon, and the sky above it was purple, fading to black. The cemetery was empty. Everyone had gone home hours ago. The fresh grave was covered in flowers, white lilies, yellow roses, a wreath from the church with a ribbon that said, "Beloved." The dirt was dark red clay, still loose and soft. James knelt beside the headstone. It was simple, gray granite, plain lettering, the kind of headstone Nathaniel would have chosen. It read, Nathaniel Price, 1946 to 2024. A useful man. A useful man. James had written those words for the headstone. He'd thought about it for days. What to put on a stone that would sum up 78 years of living. He considered beloved father. He considered a good man. He considered a Bible verse. But none of those were right. None of those captured the thing that made Nathaniel who he was. So James wrote, a useful man, because that is what Nathaniel would have wanted. That is what Nathaniel was. Not important, not famous, not powerful, useful. The most useful man James had ever known. James put his hand on the stone. It was still warm from the afternoon sun, even as the air around it cooled. The warmth felt alive, like a handshake, like a shoulder squeeze, like Nathaniel's hand on his back guiding him through a dark hallway when the power went out. I know now, James whispered. I know everything. And I'm not angry, Dad. I'm not angry because how could I be angry at a man who gave me everything he had? You didn't just fix broken things. You fixed me. You took a broken boy, a boy on a kitchen floor with nothing, and you made him whole. You made him an engineer. You made him a husband. You made him a father. And you did it so quietly that I never even heard the hammering. He paused. The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying the smell of turned earth and distant wood smoke, and the last fading sweetness of the season's pecans. I named my son after you, James said. You know that. But now I know why. I named him after you because even before I knew the truth, some part of me understood. Some part of me knew that the name Nathaniel meant something bigger than a word. It meant sacrifice. It meant showing up. It meant choosing to love when nobody would have blamed you for walking away. He pressed his forehead against the cold stone. Thank you, Dad. For the pecans, for the algebra, for the porch and the pie and the blue shirts in the third pew. For everything. For me. He stayed until the sky turned fully dark and the stars came out. scattered and bright, the way stars are in Alabama, away from the city lights. Then he stood up. His knees ached from kneeling. He brushed the dirt from his pants. He looked at the headstone one more time. "I'll be back," he said. "Every year. I'll bring pecans." He drove home to Atlanta, 3 hours on the highway. The letter was on the passenger seat. The photograph was in his jacket pocket, against his heart. The custody document was in the envelope, sealed again, to be kept forever. Camille was waiting at the front door. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. She took one look at his face and knew. She put her arms around him and held him in the doorway, and they stood there for a long time, holding each other, while the night air moved around them. "What did you find?" she asked. James told her everything. The letter, the photograph, Gloria, Robert, the apartment, the cereal, the 41 years. He told her about the night Nathaniel drove to Birmingham and picked up a 3-year-old boy who had nobody. He told her about Dorothy singing in the bathtub. He told her about the secret, carried like a stone for 4 decades. Camille listened. She held his hand. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Then she said, "He was your father, James. In every way that matters, every way that counts, he was your father. And what he did, keeping that secret, carrying it alone so you wouldn't have to carry it, that wasn't a lie. That was the biggest act of love I've ever heard of." James nodded. He went to the children's room. Little Dorothy was sleeping on her back, arms spread wide, mouth slightly open, her breathing slow and even. She looked like her namesake when she slept. Peaceful, open, completely unafraid of the world. Nate was curled on his side, his face pressed against a stuffed bear that Nathaniel had given him on his last visit to Millbrook. The bear was brown and soft, with a red bow tie that was coming unstitched. Nathaniel had repaired that bow tie twice. The stitches were small and neat and perfect because Nathaniel did everything that way. James knelt between their beds. The nightlight cast a warm glow across the room. Soft yellow, the color of pecan shells, the color of morning light in the kitchen on Chestnut Street. "I'm going to tell you about your grandfather someday," James whispered. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his son. "I'm going to tell you that he was a small man who did enormous things. That he fixed everything that was broken, and never asked for credit, and never sent a bill. That he cracked pecans under a tree and gave them away to everyone he met. That he wore the same blue shirt every day and the same brown shoes, and he was the richest man I ever knew." He reached over and pulled the blanket up to Nate's chin. The boy sighed in his sleep and clutched the bear tighter. "And I'm going to tell you the most important thing of all," James said. "That your grandfather chose to love someone he didn't have to love. And that one choice, that one quiet, brave, impossible choice, made everything else possible. The college, the job, the bridges I build, this house, your mother, you." He kissed both children on the forehead. He stood up. He walked to the doorway and looked back at them, sleeping, safe, warm, loved, surrounded by the life that Nathaniel Price had built for them with his scarred hands and his still eyes and his heart that was bigger than anyone ever knew. "Being useful is better than being important," James whispered. "Grandpa taught me that, and I'm going to teach it to you." The next morning, James drove to Millbrook one more time. He went to the house on Chestnut Street. He sat at the kitchen table, Nathaniel's chair left side near the window. He cracked pecans from the tree, one at a time. Pop, crack, pop. The same sound that had been the soundtrack of his childhood. He filled a mason jar. He screwed the lid tight. Then he drove to Greater Hope Baptist Church. Robert was still there, sitting in the back pew, alone, staring at the stained glass. He hadn't left Millbrook. He was staying at the motel on Route 6, sleeping badly, eating worse, waiting for something he couldn't name. Forgiveness, maybe, or punishment, or just the courage to feel what he had been running from for 41 years.
James sat beside his uncle, his biological father, the man who had called his own son baggage and driven away in a silver BMW. They didn't speak for a long time. The church was empty.
The afternoon light came through the stained glass and made colors on the wooden floor. Blue, gold, red, green, and the colors moved slowly as the sun moved, like the church itself was breathing. Then James set the mason jar of pecans on the pew between them. "Dad grew these," James said, and the word dad, he used it deliberately, carefully, the way Nathaniel would have placed a bolt. Not Nathaniel, not your brother, Dad, because that is who Nathaniel was. That is who he would always be. Not a handyman, not a substitute, a father, the best one James could have asked for. Robert looked at the jar. His chin trembled, his mouth pressed into a thin line. His eyes, the eyes that used to charm rooms, the eyes that used to convince people to sign things they shouldn't sign, filled with tears. "I didn't deserve him," Robert whispered. His voice was small, the smallest James had ever heard it. "I didn't deserve a brother like him. And you didn't deserve what I did. Walking away, calling you—" He stopped. He couldn't say it. "Baggage," James said. Not with anger, with the calm, steady voice of a man who has been loved well enough to survive the truth. Robert flinched. He closed his eyes. A tear ran down his cheek and fell onto the pew. "No," James said. "You didn't deserve him. But he wasn't doing it for you. He was doing it for me, and for Dorothy, and for himself. Because that's who he was. He saw something broken, and he fixed it. That was his whole life. That was his gift." Robert opened his eyes. He looked at James, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in 41 years. He saw Nathaniel's posture, Nathaniel's stillness, Nathaniel's steady eyes. Robert's blood, yes, but Nathaniel's soul. "Thank you," Robert said, "for the pecans." James looked at the jar, then at the altar, then at the stained glass with its colors moving slowly across the floor. "Thank him," James said. "Every pecan on that tree grew because he tended it for 40 years. Every single one. Just like he tended me." James walked out of the church into the November afternoon. The air was cool and clean. The sky was wide and blue. The pecan tree in the yard on Chestnut Street was visible from the parking lot, its wide branches reaching up and out, bare now, the last nuts of the season already fallen. They lay on the ground beneath the tree, small and brown, waiting to be gathered, waiting to be cracked open, waiting to be given away. James got in his car. He set the letter on the passenger seat. 12 pages of truth. 41 years of love. Written in pencil, on lined paper, by a man who never owned a suit and never needed one. By a man who was not important, who was something better. He was useful. He was faithful. He was there. And that's where we'll leave this story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from this? See you next time.